Bobby, I don't know if you allow it this way, but my family is far and away my greatest passion, and I'm a father of three boys, and we've got a boy cousin that lives with us, so four boys at home, two boy dogs, a wonderful wife, and I just love being a dad so much, and really enjoy all the things we get to do in this community. So that would about far away be my greatest passion.
Introduce yourself.
So my name is Ted Swann. I am a family physician in Clemson, South Carolina. I've been working in Clemson in that capacity for, I think, maybe 16 years. And for the last 8 years, I've had my own practice. When I came to Clemson, I was really blessed to be able to work with my mentor, Dr. Bill Dukes, who had been an old-timey country doctor who had taken care of this community for years. And while I was still green, I got to, just kind of work under his, I just kind of felt like he always had his arm around me, but I got to learn from really one of the best. And so that was a real blessing. But at the same time, he was also my mentor. And in many ways, as a physician, I wanted to emulate him. And as things have changed in healthcare, I was feeling a lot of pressure to be a doctor different than the doctor that I really was so attracted to being. And so with his blessing, several years ago, I decided to open up my own practice, essentially for the autonomy to practice medicine the way I really want to.
How did this, and I call it the COVID diagram that you have been posting on Facebook, talk about the genesis of that real quick, and then talk about what it is and why did you do this for your community, so to speak?
So this whole time has just been, it's been a journey. And in the beginning, we just did not know what was coming. And there was so much uncertainty, and watching it kind of work its way towards the United States was really unnerving. And so then when we started seeing news reports through Twitter or even on the national news about what was happening in Italy, it was just horrifying. Some of the severity of illness, just all of a sudden healthcare systems being overwhelmed. There were reports of physicians having to choose between who they gave a chance to on a ventilator because they didn't have machines. That really disturbed me. And as being a solo doctor, I don't have anybody to fall back on. So it was on me to prepare myself to help my patients. You'll remember that there was this PPE crisis. And so not being part of a big healthcare system, I had to fend for myself. And that was really being scrappy and getting all that. But the bottom line is we had so much uncertainty. We did not have PPE. There was no vaccine, no treatment, no really good protocols. We didn't have the ability to test. So we didn't have the ability to know who was sick. And then when we did get testing, we ran out of reagents to do the test. And it was just kind of chaos, but it was ruled by uncertainty. And so, as I mentioned in some of those writings early on, if there's a beast that is charging you and you do not know what that is, you got to have a defensive position, and you kind of got to run and get settled until you can figure this thing out. So in the beginning, we ran and tried to start learning about it. So here we are many months down the road, and a lot of those early problems, we've made a lot of progress with them. So PPE, really just recently are we caught up with that. And I think most places would say they have supply. Um, Management of the sickest patients. Enough people have been doing it to figure it out. And so people who are critically ill are doing better than they were doing with hospitalization protocols. Um, One of the remarkable things about this virus is how different it impacts different people. And so, we look at children and how the virus can impact them, and we look at grandparents and what happens to them, and it is amazing, how threatening this virus is for the elderly population. And it is just stunning that the same virus that gives my son a runny nose could kill the next door neighbor who's 80 years old. And it's just that's so remarkable. However, we've learned these things. We've learned that risk and I kind of manifest in two ways. One is it's a threat to my personal health. But also, if I get sick, I have the ability to impact my community if I spread it. So when I think about it, I think about those two different ways. And so, as somebody who's under 50, the odds of me dying from the virus, if I was to get it, are really low. And particularly, I'm under 50 and I don't have other risk factors.
Which I'm under 50, but I've had asthma since I was a little child. Mm-hmm. And so my risk factor goes up to some threshold, as my family is very cautious about it, because they know if anybody in my circle, my mom, anybody in that circle gets it and I get it, I might react differently, and we don't know, because I'm asthmatic, so good point.
So, early on we were uncertain. We've learned a lot now. And one of the very important things is we've learned who's at risk for what. And of course, death is the thing that probably matters the most. And then any long-term effect of the illness also matters a lot. And we've also learned how to prevent spread. Those are two really critical things. We know who's at different levels of risks, and we know the type of interventions that break the chains of contagion. And so those two types of information can inform us in a way that we previously were not informed. And so in my mind, we can act with precision. Earlier, we had a one-size-fits-all, basically run away until we can learn more. But now we've learned more, and so a really customized way that an individual person can assess, if I choose X, Y, or Z, what is the risk that I'm taking on personally for my personal health, and then what risks might I open the door for me to impact my community if I were to get sick. And so, that had been in my head. That actually was in my head from the very beginning. I was just brainstorming, like, what might it look like down the road? And so having this customized way to interact, only recently do I feel like I've been able to generate a rough draft of what that might look like.
There are a lot of people trying to make decisions. They're trying to make decisions on how I should run my business, whether I should take my children to the park where there might be other kids playing, whether I should go to church or should a church be open. And they're having to decipher a lot of data. You'll see stuff from DHEC come down, CDC come down, your local sheriff's departments, all these data points that we're seeing. How do you talk to your patients about deciphering all this chart junk of data that's being flooded to us to make a good decision for themselves and their families? How do you help navigate your patients through that very complicated discussion?
So we are having to get our head around living with some level of risk. Okay, because problem is not going away, and that's the sobering reality. And so it's just like getting on the interstate. You take a little bit of risk if you get on the interstate, and so you wear your seatbelt. And who you are, maybe you feel really confident and you go down the fast lane, and maybe you only drive at certain times of the day when there's less traffic. But the reality is, this COVID thing is not going away right now. People are ready to do something with their life. So we're going to have to make decisions in this setting of risk. And we are not yet back to new normal. I also think when we try to do the best with the information that we have, and we have to acknowledge that information is incomplete and it's continuing to emerge. And I'll highlight the incompleteness because it impacts children. So I think any single individual should understand their individual risk for critical illness. Okay, so as an individual, I need to know, where do I fall in risk as we currently understand risk? So really simple. If you're over age 70, your risk of critical illness really starts to go up compared to the rest of society. If you're under 10 years old, your risk of serious illness is incredibly low. So you need to know where you stand. And then we also know that there are very specific to this virus, there are diseases that some people have that increase their risk a little bit, and some are more important than others. And in this virus, it is cardiovascular disease with hypertension, particularly diabetes and obesity. And there's reasons why that's the case, but it is absolutely a major risk factor. So any individual needs to understand their risk. And then we also need to know what's happening in my community. How likely am I to bump into somebody that might be carrying this virus? And so we call that a disease burden. And if the disease burden is low in my community, I can feel like I'm operating with less general risk because there's less of this around me. And so that really needs to help govern, and that's dynamic. And that's dynamic, maybe shifting within a 1 to 3 week time frame, depending on what's going on. So individual risk and then community risk, those are the kind of things to consider. And then what are the choices that stepwise increase my risk for getting this disease or this virus, and what are the things that reduce my risk? So that's the framework, doing the best with information that we have now that we did not have previously. So if you take a church, because I know you're very interested in a church setting, so many of our parishioners who their church family is so important to their life. There's no doubt, at least in my church, that the older demographic in my church, their church family is precious.
Yes, very precious.
This has been a crazy time for that age demographic in so many ways, but to feel like they've been cut off to a large degree from their church family has been a very painful thing to deal with. So how can those people come back? And I've had these conversations with my pastor throughout the whole time. And so one of the things that we've been talking about, as I said, maybe you should have a service only for that group. So in my church, we only have one service on Sunday. And many churches, for reasons, have two services, one early, one later. And I said, Rusty, what about having, but because one of the problems is how many people you have in a place at any one time. So if you can spread people out, then the people that are present are less at a risk to each other. And I'm saying, well, maybe we should have a service for 65 and up.
Interesting.
It'll be a smaller group. They can spread out. But from a church setting, this virus is spread through our breath. And I was standing somewhere recently where somebody was smoking, several feet away from me, and I could smell the smoke. Okay, the smoke that I smelled was from their breath, and so that is how much this kind of distributes. So we want to control how much breath I might be exposed to from anybody else around me. So it's a factor of time is a part of that story. If I give you an opportunity to breathe on me 100 times because we were together for an hour versus 30 times, I can manage that time and reduce my exposure, or we can get further away from each other in our separation. So we've talked about having shorter services and creating opportunities to be spread out and services for special groups to make that work. One of the really bizarre things about this virus in church is that singing seems to really project more of this virus into the air. Now, I don't know that we can say it exactly the way I said it, but the observation that people have become super spreaders in church environments, there's no doubt that we're seeing some really tragic things happen from people in church, and singing has a lot to do with it, where one person can really affect a lot of people around them, and that's hard on church. Making a joyful noise together is a part of celebrating. It's a part of worship, and it's just part of our normal activities. And so, I think, unfortunately, corporate singing is probably not the thing to do right now. You don't want to hear me sing anyway. Right. But if we had, a single person, singing, that would be a way to enjoy music. So individual groups, individual settings, what can you do to manage those risks? So if we considered a service where we could really spread people out, for people who have been generally otherwise very diligent about staying home and protecting themselves, I see that as a potential opportunity. I'm not ready to fully endorse it because I'm still thinking it through. And on the other hand, young families with young children, they're probably
tough.
They're not vulnerable to getting critically ill. One of the problems with this observing young people and children is that it is not zero, right? If it was zero risk, well, this would be an easy decision, but you hear about some of these cases of multi-system inflammatory syndrome in children. And, what if that's your kid, right? If you play the numbers, it doesn't make any sense to let that bother you because the numbers are so low. But as a mother or a father, you say, well, even though that's very unlikely to happen, maybe I don't want to take that risk. What I hear Dr. Swann say and everybody else say is we don't have all the information. So to that note, from a child standpoint, a lot of evidence thus far seemed to say that children are less likely to catch the virus. And then those that did catch the virus, usually it's what we call vertical transmission. They got it from an adult family member. So it came down this way. They didn't catch it from a peer. So maybe children are less likely to get it. If they get sick, the observation has been that they're not likely to get very sick. And the last thing is that they're also not likely to give it to peers. So that makes you feel pretty positive about, what we might find for our kids, particularly considering going back to school. But the flip side of that story is, well, at least in the United States, maybe our data is heavily skewed because we took everybody out of school and very few kids have been in camp settings. And so they've been so distant anyway. Who else could they get sick from other than a family member?
Right.
And there's a lot of, there's a family in Clemson where the mother got sick. So she was tested and found positive. The father started to get sick. He was tested, he got positive, and their kids got sick. And there was no doubt they had the virus, and they didn't want to put them through jacking a Q-tip up their nose. So they didn't get tested. And so those kids, there's no doubt they had it, but they're not going to show up in the data. So that just goes to show you how, data doesn't tell the whole story. And, some people are afraid of what we're going to find when we go back to school is all of a sudden we're going to find out pretty quickly, what happens. This being rushed back to in-person school is a giant experiment, and it might work out really well for us, or we might find, oh, that was a bad idea. I know a lot of people are struggling with that uncertainty. So anyway,
that's a great.
I'm rambling.
No, that's great, and I wanted to point out real quick is our church at Boulevard Baptist Church, which is almost like a sister church to Clemson First Baptist. We actually share someone, Dr. Johnny McKinney, who used to be our pastor and now attends and is a member there. We have really talked, with other similar churches and how we're approaching things. And we started off with, okay, the numbers are down in March, so we're going to project to open on June 28th. And we're going to plan and plan and plan. We reopen. And the day that we reopen, we find out that someone in our children's child care facility that we're getting ready to reopen to had COVID. And so we made the decision the next day to shut everything back down, especially given the fact that the numbers were 16-fold compared to where we were in March when we made that decision. And so many of our church members are like, well, we want to have the personal choice if we want to congregate. And so we're in this balance. Is it a personal decision? Is it a church decision? How do you manage that? And I think right now, we don't know how to manage that. I think there's not enough data to help us understand what is the best decision. But I do think what you provided is a framework to start thinking ahead and making those decisions and those plans as you start envisioning what reopening might look like down the road.
Definitely. So I had this conversation last week with my pastor, and I think you want to think about community burden. And right now in Clemson, or at least the last couple of weeks, the community burden has been very high. And it's been a challenge for my pastor because our church has not had an in-person service in the sanctuary since the beginning of this. And other churches in the community and in the surrounding areas have opened back up. And some of them have had just straight up traditional services and operating like normal. And so we've had, members of our church say, well, other places are doing it, why shouldn't we do it? And they always put it back on my shoulders and a couple other physician colleagues that go to church with us. But what I told my pastor was that if there's a moderate disease activity, it might be practical for them to open the church, but be very deliberate about risk settings and say, we do not encourage our 70 and up, 65 and up, whatever that number they draw the line at, to come to this service because this is going to be a more largely attended. So we've created a separate service where we can spread that demographic out. But basically go through what is the church doing to reduce the potential for spread, and then say, you're welcome to come. This is what we're doing, but we want you to make this decision based off your individual risks. Because we've had the doors closed, and they probably don't have to be closed to all. And I think if we are very transparent about the way we view risks and can talk about the things that we're doing, then any individual member of our church can say, okay, if I go to worship today, this is the setting I will find. And I think I'm comfortable with that. Or somebody else might say, I'm okay watching it online. That's worked out pretty well for me. I think I'll do that. One of the things that our church did was they started having Wednesday night services outdoor in the parking lot where
Smart.
you could have the benefit of just a breeze to dissipate some of this threat. And that went really well. People were so happy to just be together, even though it was spaced out. It's just a testimony to how much people need the connection from their church family. So trying to find a way to connect people, I feel the pain of all the pastors, but it's a real risk if you're just kind of doing it blindly and not paying attention to these risks. I think that's a little bit irresponsible. But I do think that ultimately you present the opportunity to the individual, and you can make your recommendations, but ultimately let the individual decide. So that's something that I've been working through with my pastor and the group that I'm involved at the church. And again, you're seeing the rough draft of my thoughts and evolving. I also want to say that the diagram that I shared with you, in part, is my own because I started thinking that way in the very beginning, but it's not so original that other people have not also thought of similar things. So I've started to see a little bit of that type of stuff out there, trying to diagram individual risk with community risk and how you might make decisions. So I don't want to take full credit for that.
Dr. Ted Swann, Cub brother, Clemson graduate, good community guy, friend. Thank you for your time. Appreciate the opportunity to spend some time with you, and hope you have a good rest of the day. Thank you.
You're welcome, Bobby. Anytime. We could talk forever. Have a great day.
You too. Talk to you soon. Bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye.